Considering the success that Shane Beamer and South Carolina have had over the past couple years, if the Gamecocks start off worse than 3-2 in 2023, in all honesty, it would be a disappointment.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and you can find my written work over on Gamecocks Digest on SI.com. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first watch or listen for your team every day. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. South Carolina is less than 2 weeks away from kicking off the 2023 football season. And so I know a lot of you are very excited about what this team could be this upcoming fall. South Carolina's got a ton of potential to be a really good team, but they've also got a really tough stretch to start off this season. A stretch that includes games against teams like North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi State, and Tennessee. And considering what Shane Beamer and this staff have done over the past couple of years, if South Carolina's football team starts off with a record worse than 3-2, honestly, it would be very disappointing. Now, to provide a little bit more context into the first 5 weeks of this season, the Gamecocks, of course, kick off the 2023 season against North Carolina on September the 2nd in Charlotte. Then they have a home game against Furman the following week, and that game is followed up by a road trip to Athens where they'll face off against the Georgia Bulldogs. Then they play Mississippi State back in Williams-Brice on September 23rd, and then on September 30th, the Gamecocks will make the trip to Rocky Top to take on the Tennessee Volunteers. Now, why would it be disappointing if the Gamecocks start off worse than 3-2? Well, out of the 5 games that I just mentioned, realistically speaking, South Carolina could win 4 of these 5 games. Another way to look at it is the one game that you're probably not very confident in the Gamecocks winning under any circumstance or almost any circumstance is probably that Georgia game. Because Georgia, again, they've just got a ton of talent at all 3 levels on each side of the football, both offense and defense. And the Gamecocks, I just don't think that they have enough in the trenches quite yet to compete against the Bulldogs. So I don't think that really any Gamecock fans out there are expecting South Carolina to win that game. But South Carolina could win each of the other games. It's the Furman Paladins. South Carolina should win that game. North Carolina, that defense hasn't been good for several years. And everyone talks about Drake May, but what if the people around Drake May don't show up against the Gamecocks? Mississippi State, they've got a new head coach. And yes, it's unfortunate to talk about because of the tragic circumstances that took place this past winter with Mike Leach. But Zach Arnett, we don't really know if he is head coaching material in the SEC. They're bringing in a pro-style offense for a team that's been running the air raid for the last 3-4 years. We don't know how that's going to work. And then Tennessee, I talked about this late last week. They are really getting cocky about this game against South Carolina, and they seem to think that they can just walk on in and just blow out the Gamecocks. What if they come in a little bit overzealous? Maybe the emotions of the revenge game just get to them, quite frankly. And what if Rattler and this offense just go off once again? All of those factors could play out in that fashion. And if that does take place, you could easily see how South Carolina could start this season off with a 4-1 record. Now, another reason why it would be disappointing if the Gamecocks start off with a record worse than 3-2 is the fact that this is a program that is now expected to not just be competitive when they face top 25 opponents, but also win their fair share of matchups. South Carolina defeated 3 top 15 teams this past season, 2 of them on the road. They won a road game against Kentucky in the middle of the season, their first road win against Kentucky since 2012. They, of course, defeated the Tennessee Volunteers at home in the second to last week of the regular season, and they knocked off the Clemson Tigers for the first time in 9 calendar years late in November this past fall. And the thing to note about winning all of those games for South Carolina is their confidence should no longer be lacking. The previous 4 years leading into 2022, South Carolina had only won 2 games against top 25 teams. But now, with what they did this past fall, confidence should no longer be a problem, and that is a big deal when you're talking about a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old kids in these college football programs. So, you're no longer expected to be a team that rolls over. You're expected to be a team that actually wins some of these games if you're South Carolina. The third reason why it would be disappointing if South Carolina starts off worse than 3-2 this fall is this. This first 5-week stretch is a golden opportunity for Shane Beamer and his staff to show that this program has grown in another aspect. That aspect being how they start their season. Because the past 2 years, if there's one thing the Gamecocks have struggled with consistently, it's been getting off to a good start. In 2021, South Carolina lost half of their first 6 games. One against Georgia on the road, again against Kentucky at home, and their third loss came against the Volunteers in Knoxville. And the average margin of each defeat was 19.3 points. With the exception of the Kentucky game, none of these games were really all that close. And then in 2022, South Carolina lost 2 of their first 3 games of the season. They lost their first game at Arkansas over in Fayetteville, and then they got blown out in week 3 this past fall by the Georgia Bulldogs, and they lost both of those games by an average margin of 27.5 points. Now, some might sit there and argue that the Gamecocks have really had a bad luck of the draw when it comes to their strength of schedule at the beginning of the season. And that might be true to a certain extent. But the thing is, every single SEC team eventually has to go through their own gauntlet, whether it takes place at the beginning, at the middle, or at the end of the season. And starting in 2024, when Oklahoma and Texas both joined the SEC, it's only going to get more difficult for South Carolina. So the bottom line with this talking point is South Carolina, they don't have a choice. They have got to find a way to start the season on a higher note this fall. If South Carolina can start off 3-2 or better, they're going to get a lot of pats on the back from people both regionally and nationally, because to be honest with you, a lot of people are sitting there expecting South Carolina to go 3-2, and some people might even expect them to go 2-3 possibly. But if South Carolina does go 2-3 or worse, then in essence, I don't want to say the momentum from last season is completely gone, but it would definitely be disappointing for Shane Beamer and this program if after all they did at the end of this past fall, they turn around and once again they show that they just cannot find a way to get off to a good start to these seasons. It's going to lead to more questions of the coaching staff. In essence, I think that this staff and this team understands the sense of urgency that they have to have for this season because, again, these first 5 weeks, it is a daunting slate. It is grueling. Most teams probably would rather not have to face these first 5 teams on their own schedule. But if South Carolina can start off 3-2 or better, then they're going to reap a lot of benefits from it. If they start off worse than that, it would be an absolute disappointment considering what they've done over the past couple of years. Now, in just a couple of moments, we're going to revisit a topic that we have discussed in passing on this show before regarding South Carolina's backup quarterback position, because a National College Football writer posted an interesting tidbit regarding LaNorris Sellers and where his reps took place in South Carolina's second scrimmage this past Saturday afternoon. What does it all mean? We're going to dive into all of that in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Now, as a small business owner, You always want to make sure that you have access to the most qualified candidates that are looking to work in your field or business, whether you're involved in asset management, maybe you're involved in food services, or maybe you run a pet supply company. No matter what business you operate, if you find yourself in a position where you're struggling to find the right people, you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs today. Just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring, and utilize tools like screening questions to filter through the candidates and populate the right people for your small business. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus other leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions still apply. Welcome back to this Monday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day in just 30 minutes. And as always, thank you to each and every one of you everydayers for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily watch or listen when it comes to South Carolina Gamecocks sports coverage. We're going to dive into a ton of storylines surrounding South Carolina's schedule throughout the rest of this week. We'll discuss which 3 games are the most difficult outside of the Georgia game. We'll talk about why the Kentucky game, not the Mississippi State game, is the biggest trap game for the Gamecocks this fall. And also, we'll discuss why this season is so pivotal for Shane Beamer and this program's future trajectory. We'll touch on all of that throughout the rest of this week right here on Locked On Gamecocks. But let's talk about an intriguing storyline that is beginning to develop at the quarterback position. And no, this has nothing to do with Spencer Rattler nor his health status. What I want to talk about is a tweet that got posted by 24/7 Sports national college football writer Brad Crawford on Sunday morning. This tweet was discussing something that he heard about South Carolina's second scrimmage from Saturday. And this is what Brad Crawford had to say. Quote, "Positive reviews continue to roll in on LaNorris Sellers, South Carolina's 4-star freshman quarterback. Was told he looked sharp in Saturday's second scrimmage, and he ran with the second team offense. Without question, he's the future of the program at the position for the Gamecocks." Now, there's a lot to dive into with this tweet right here, because this LaNorris Sellers tweet from Brad Crawford validates multiple things about LaNorris Sellers, Dowell Loggains offense, and also Luke Doty. The first thing that this tweet validates is that the idea of Luke Doty taking wide receiver reps in practice due to Sellers' continued progression isn't such a far-fetched idea. I touched on this possibility around 12 days ago when initial reports started to come out that Luke Doty was taking some practice snaps at wide receiver. Here's a clip and soundbite of me discussing that storyline from that show. LaNorris Sellers' development maybe has gone so well that the staff is comfortable moving Luke Doty around to the wide receiver position. I do think that it says a lot about LaNorris Sellers that Luke Doty is taking some practice snaps at wide receiver. I'm by no means saying that LaNorris Sellers has officially supplanted Luke Doty as the backup quarterback on this roster, but I do think that this indicates a couple different things about LaNorris Sellers. First of all, putting Luke Doty out at wide receiver, that adds to the risk of him possibly getting injured. If the coaching staff was a bit concerned about maybe the progression of some of the guys behind Spencer Rattler and Luke Doty, they would not make a move like that. This could be a precursor to a potential future move for the South Carolina native. It could be a similar situation to what we saw play out with Dakereon Joyner this offseason. Now, to reiterate what I said back then, it wouldn't make complete sense if Luke Doty was the backup quarterback and yet was also taking reps at wide receiver, unless he maybe wasn't a shoo-in to be the backup quarterback for South Carolina this fall, which this tweet from Brad Crawford does seem to indicate to a certain extent. Now, Brad Crawford, in fairness to him, did follow up that tweet with another tweet by saying that he still thinks that Luke Doty is going to be the number 2 quarterback on South Carolina's depth chart when game week approaches for North Carolina. But it does seem like that right now we have a true battle going on for the backup quarterback position. Will it be the veteran Luke Doty, or will it be the likely future of the program in LaNorris Sellers? There's still a lot of time left before South Carolina's first matchup takes place, so we'll definitely have to see how this continues to shake out. Now, another thing that this tweet about LaNorris Sellers validates is that Dowell Loggains' offense is truly quarterback friendly. Some might argue that if a player is talented enough and smart enough like LaNorris Sellers is, then they can come into any offense, any system, and make a push for maybe the backup role or the starting spot like LaNorris Sellers has to this point in the offseason. In my opinion, however, the system that a quarterback is in, it still has to be in a particular place where a young quarterback can thrive and grow quickly. And it appears that Dowell Loggains' scheme is allowing LaNorris Sellers to do just that. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that the offense is super simple and easy to learn. But as Dowell Loggains has stated all offseason multiple times now, he wants this offense to run through the strengths of his quarterback. And the fact that LaNorris Sellers is progressing at the rate he is right now, I think that partly proves that that is indeed what Dowell Loggains' scheme is doing. It is running through his quarterback. It is a quarterback-friendly system. So I think that that's a good sign overall for Dowell Loggains' system, and also what it's doing for Spencer Rattler. If LaNorris Sellers is progressing at the rate he is as a backup, the potential top backup to Spencer Rattler, then one can only imagine just how much this offense has done for the Arizona native coming back into his second year as the starting quarterback for South Carolina. Now, the last thing that this tweet validates is Luke Doty's unselfishness and loyalty to this football program. If we are to assume, and the key word is assume here, that everything we've discussed about Luke Doty's wide receiver reps before today are true, then this is indicative of a backup quarterback battle between Luke Doty and LaNorris Sellers. It would also be indicative of the loyalty that Luke Doty has when it comes to South Carolina, and that if he should lose the backup quarterback job to LaNorris Sellers, that he just might stick around at the end of the day. What I mean by all of that is this. If Luke Doty was just hellbound and determined that he was going to play quarterback and no other position on this team, we probably wouldn't hear anything, of course, about him taking some practice snaps at wide receiver. But yet Luke Doty is not fighting against the idea of him maybe playing a different position, at least in practice, but therefore potentially in a game at this point. And that also indicates that in the long term, or in the long run, if LaNorris Sellers becomes the backup quarterback behind Spencer Rattler, or at least maybe this next offseason, he ends up becoming the starter for South Carolina, assuming Spencer Rattler has thrived in this offense and has moved on to the NFL. Then Luke Doty would be open to both staying and also playing in a different role in order to best help the team and also give himself a chance to actually see the field, a la Takarion Joyner and what happened with him several years ago. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that Luke Doty is going to end up at running back at this rate like Takarion Joyner has, but Luke Doty playing wide receiver, you absolutely could make a case that he could slide on over to that position group, and he could also find a decent role for himself at that spot. So, point being, pay attention to this backup quarterback battle, because it seems like there truly is a battle going on here, and it's going to be something to watch as this season continues to progress for South Carolina's football team. Now, for the final portion of today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, let's discuss an intriguing transfer portal addition that the Gamecocks landed this past weekend, as South Carolina landed UAB transfer edge rusher Drew Tuamaza on Saturday night. And while Drew Tuamaza won't be a starter for South Carolina, he has the athletic profile and experience that can help South Carolina's defensive front. So what exactly does Drew Tuamaza bring to South Carolina's defense? Well, one, he brings proven production and experience. In 2022, Drew Tuamaza racked up 33 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 3 quarterback hurries, and 1 forced fumble. And it's also been a long and windy road for Drew Tuamaza when it comes to his college football journey. He played for 2 seasons up at Syracuse. Then he played for a season at East Mississippi Community College before playing this past fall at UAB, and now he is playing for South Carolina. The Gamecocks now have a quartet of edge defenders that are heading into at least their 5th season of college football. Jordan Stratton is about to begin his 7th season of college football. Tyree Johnson, he's heading into his 6th year. And Dowell Loggains and Drew Tuamaza are both heading into their 5th season of college football. Certainly doesn't hurt to have all that experience in that position group, especially considering some of the younger guys like a Desmond Umeozulu or potentially a Jatius Gear, who might not be young in terms of his college journey, but also he's never played it down in the SEC, and now he's got a few other guys that can maybe help him out a little bit in terms of what all they've been through in their college careers. Another thing that Drew Tuamaza brings to South Carolina is a strong base of strength at a position that definitely requires it. When I watched some of the game film from Drew Tuamaza's 2022 season at UAB, what I saw was a guy that displayed a lot of lower body strength when he was engaged with a blocker in a one-on-one situation. Even without moving his feet consistently, Tuamaza was rarely driven back by the opposing offensive lineman. He also does a really good job of extending his arms in his upper body and keeping them locked out when he's engaged with a blocker. Separation is extremely important for defensive ends. When you have separation, it allows you to do a bevy of things in terms of trying to disengage the blocker, get the blocker off of you, and then allows you to go try and make a play on the quarterback or on a ball carrier. Drew Tuamaza possesses both of those traits, and both of them are extremely important, especially when it comes to rush defense, which I think could help out South Carolina, a team that is trying to improve that aspect of their defense. And then the last thing that Drew Tuamaza offers is positional versatility. In UAB's defense, which ran multiple different fronts, Tuamaza had to line up in multiple different stances, shaded over different gaps and linemen on both sides of the line. So, an example would be, on one play, Drew Tuamaza could be standing straight up, shaded on the outside half of the right tackle on one play. And then the very next play, depending on the call that the defense got, Tuamaza could be lined up on the inside half of the left tackle on the other side of the line with his hand in the dirt. So Tuamaza, he's got experience moving around on both sides of the line, being in different stances, being in different spots. In essence, there's a lot of different things that he has done in terms of alignment that he is very familiar with. So this is not a guy where you have to plug him in one spot and he's got to stay there the entire time he's playing in the ball game. You can move Drew Tuamaza around to different areas of the field, and that's something that's going to be a bonus for Clayton White, and also will hopefully make it easier for Drew Tuamaza to learn the playbook, because if you're a guy that's moving around to multiple spots on the field, you gotta have an ability to retain the knowledge of the playbook. And if Tuamaza could do that at UAB, he can also therefore do that at South Carolina. Now, I've talked a lot about the positives in Drew Tuamaza's game to this point, but admittedly, there are a couple things that Drew Tuamaza could improve, because he's got to become more technically sound as a defensive end, especially now that he's in the SEC. The main issue that I saw with Drew Tuamaza's film from this past year is he did not get blockers' hands off of him enough times. In essence, he was really good at holding his ground, but when it came time to try and disengage the block and then try to get away scot-free so he could make a beeline towards the quarterback or ball carrier, Drew Tuamaza rarely got off of his man. He did not use his hands enough. He did not drive his feet enough. And if he does that in the SEC, quite frankly, sometimes he's just going to get flat out mauled, because SEC offensive linemen, they are certainly not your Conference USA offensive linemen. They will make you pay for not being technically sound in the trenches. So he is going to have to work on that throughout the course of this season. Also, he has got to add a couple of moves to his pass rushing arsenal. When I watched Drew Tuamaza in pass rush, the thing that stuck out to me was that he pretty much has one move, and that's a dip and rip. If you're that predictable when it comes to your pass rushing arsenal, offensive linemen are going to key on that after about 1 or 2 plays, and they'll be able to predict it for the rest of the game, and they'll make you a non-factor. So, Tuamaza, he definitely could add some more moves to his arsenal. I did see him try to attempt some spin moves this past season. He also is really good when he's allowed to crash inside into the B gap where the guard's at. So maybe South Carolina could try to use him in some situational blitzes where that kind of play or stunt is called for. But otherwise, in simple one-on-one pass rushing situations, Tuamaza, he's just got to add a couple more moves to his toolbox, because if he doesn't, again, in this conference, he's not going to have a whole lot of success. So I say all that to say this. I think that Drew Tuamaza, in terms of his experiences both on and off the field, can help this edge rusher group as a rotational player. But I do not see him as an SEC starter. So he can definitely help. He's going to provide depth. But if you're sitting there thinking that this is a guy that's going to come in and potentially get more sacks than a Jordan Burch did last year, or maybe just, blow up and thrive and become a starter for this team, I would slow your roll a little bit. I don't think he's going to have that kind of impact. Now, of course, I could very well be wrong on that. He could end up excelling as this season begins to progress and as he is able to dive into this playbook. Maybe this is a defense that fits his skill set a lot better than UAB's did. We're not going to know until he plays a few games. But right now, I see Tuamaza as an experienced rotational piece that can definitely push guys like Tyreek Johnson, Dowell Loggains, and Brian Thomas Jr. and have a chance to get some snaps at, say, that weak side defensive end spot for this team. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show, as always. What are your thoughts on South Carolina's first 5-week stretch? Do you think it would be disappointing if the Gamecocks start off with a record worse than 3-2? What do you think about this tidbit that Brad Crawford posted regarding LaNorris Sellers getting some second-team reps in Saturday's scrimmage? And lastly, what are your overall opinions on Drew Tuamaza, the kind of player he is, and what he could do for the Gamecocks this upcoming fall? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watched today's show on YouTube, or shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @aline_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. Once again, thank y'all so much for tuning in to today's show. Have a great rest of your Monday and a fantastic start to the work week. And I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.